The moment Xander Radcliffe heard the brisk knock at his door, he knew exactly who it was, and his stomach sank like a stone in a well. Mistress Gertrude Halloway, the frontier village self-appointed matchmaker, had been stalking him for 3 weeks now, appearing at market stalls, lingering outside the dairy, even cornering him at the blacksmith's when he had gone to collect new cheese molds. The woman possessed the persistence of a bloodhound and the strategic mind of a general, and Xander had run out of polite excuses. He stood frozen in his workroom, surrounded by wheels of aging cheese on wooden shelves, the rich smell of cultured milk hanging in the air, and contemplated simply not answering. But Mistress Halloway was not the sort to be deterred by a closed door. The knock came again, louder this time, accompanied by her unmistakable voice. "Mr. Radcliffe, I know you are home. I saw the smoke from your chimney and your cart is in the yard." Xander ran a hand through his dark hair, leaving a faint streak of cheese curd across his forehead, and resigned himself to another exhausting conversation about suitable young women in the village and surrounding farmsteads. He crossed the small cottage that served as both home and dairy, wiping his hands on his apron, and had just reached for the door latch when he heard something else entirely. A scuffling sound from the side of the house, followed by a muffled curse, and then the cellar door at the far end of his workroom flew open with a soft thud. A figure tumbled through it in a flurry of homespun skirts and copper-red braided hair, all long limbs and green skin, her small tusks catching the afternoon light streaming through the window. "Please," the orc girl hissed, her amber eyes wide and desperate. "Please just do not tell her I am here." Xander's mouth opened, but no sound came out. He recognized her vaguely from market days, the young woman who sold goat cheese and milk from a modest herd she kept in the hills, but they had never spoken beyond polite nods. She was slight for an orc, with a willowy build and delicate features that made her look almost elfin despite the green hue of her skin, and the small tusks that protruded just slightly over her lower lip. Her dress was simple brown wool, patched at the elbows, and her boots were caked with mud from the spring rains. "Mr. Radcliffe," the knock became pounding. "I have a lovely young woman from the Miller family I wish to introduce you to. She has excellent teeth and can bake." The orc girl pressed one finger to her lips, her eyes pleading, and then dove back toward the cellar stairs. Xander found himself moving on instinct, crossing to the door and pulling it open just enough to block Mistress Halloway's view of the interior. The matchmaker stood on his doorstep like a small but formidable storm cloud, all sharp angles and determination, wrapped in an iron-gray dress. She was perhaps 50, with steel-colored hair pulled back so tightly it seemed to lift her eyebrows, and she carried a leather-bound ledger under one arm that Xander had learned contained detailed notes on every unmarried person within a day's ride. "Mistress Halloway," Xander said, injecting as much apologetic warmth into his voice as he could muster. "I am terribly sorry, but now is truly not a good time. I have 3 batches of cheddar that need turning, and if I do not attend to them in the next hour, they will be ruined." "Nonsense," she said crisply, trying to peer past him into the cottage. "Cheese can wait 5 minutes. Marriage cannot. You are 26 years old, Mr. Radcliffe, and you have been putting this off for far too long. A man needs a wife, especially a man running a business. You are drowning in work. Anyone can see that. The Miller girl would be an excellent help." Xander opened his mouth to protest, but Mistress Halloway was already consulting her ledger. "She is 19, accomplished at the loom, cooks a fine stew, and her father owns the largest mill in the region. The connection alone would be advantageous for your cheese business. Now, I have arranged for her to come by this Thursday at Mistress Halloway. Xander interrupted, desperation making him bold. "I appreciate your efforts, truly I do, but I am not looking for a wife at present. My business requires all my attention, and I would not be fair to any woman by. That is exactly why you need a wife," she cut him off smoothly. "To share the burden. Really, Mr. Radcliffe, you cannot expect to manage alone forever. I have seen your production orders. You are weeks behind on deliveries, and you look exhausted." She was not wrong about that, which made it all the more irritating. Xander had built his cheese-making business from nothing over the past 4 years, and it had grown faster than he had anticipated. What had started as a modest operation selling at the local market now supplied 3 villages and had orders from as far as the garrison at Thornwall Keep. He worked from dawn until well past dark most days, and he had indeed fallen behind on deliveries. But hiring help cost money he preferred to save, and marriage was not a business solution, no matter what Mistress Halloway believed. "I will manage," he said firmly. "Now, if you will excuse me—" "I will not excuse you," Mistress Halloway said, her voice taking on a steely edge. "You have avoided me long enough, as has that stubborn goat-herding girl who just ran past your cottage not 2 minutes ago. Eryn Shaw, if memory serves. Where did she go?" Xander's heart skipped. He kept his expression carefully neutral. "I have no idea what you mean. I have been inside working." Mistress Halloway's eyes narrowed, and for a long moment she simply stared at him, as if trying to read the truth written on his face. Then she consulted her ledger again, flipping through pages with sharp, efficient movements. "Eryn Shaw, 20 years old. Orc, obviously, but from a respectable family despite the prejudice some of our less enlightened neighbors harbor. Keeps a herd of goats in the hills, makes decent cheese though not as fine as yours, lives alone in a small cottage her father built before he passed. Unmarried, of course, given the difficulty of finding matches for her kind, but I do not discriminate. I have several young men who might look past the tusks if properly incentivized." Xander felt a flash of irritation at the casual dismissal in her tone. "Perhaps Miss Shaw does not want to be matched," he suggested. "Everyone wants to be matched," Mistress Halloway said with absolute certainty. "They simply do not always know it yet. That is why I exist. Now step aside, Mr. Radcliffe. If she is hiding in your cottage, I will find her and we can have a productive conversation about her future." "She is not in my cottage," Xander said, which was technically true. She was in his cellar. Mistress Halloway studied him for another long moment, then sighed with the air of someone dealing with a particularly stubborn child. "Very well, but this conversation is not over. I will return Thursday with the Miller girl, and you will be civil and welcoming, or I will make it known throughout the village that you are refusing perfectly good matches out of pure stubbornness. That sort of reputation does not help a business, Mr. Radcliffe." It was not quite a threat, but it was close enough. Xander bit back a sharp retort and simply nodded. "Thursday, then." Mistress Halloway gave him one last suspicious look, then turned and marched down the path toward the village road, her posture radiating disapproval. Xander watched until she disappeared around the bend, then closed the door and leaned against it, exhaling slowly. "Is she gone?" He turned to find the orc girl, Eryn, peeking up from the cellar stairs, only her head and shoulders visible. Her expression was a mixture of relief and sheepish amusement. "She is gone," Xander confirmed. "For now." Eryn climbed the rest of the way up, brushing dust from her skirt. "Thank you. I owe you a debt. That woman has been hunting me for a month now. She showed up at my cottage 3 times last week alone. I have started leaving before dawn and not returning until after dark just to avoid her." Xander could not help but smile. "She has been hunting me for 3 weeks. I was beginning to think I might need to relocate to another village entirely." Eryn laughed, and the sound was surprisingly warm and musical. She is relentless. I have never met anyone so determined to meddle in other people's lives. She glanced around the cottage, taking in the shelves of aging cheese, the work table covered in tools and molds, the large copper pots hanging near the hearth. You really are a cheesemaker. I thought everyone was exaggerating about how much you produce. They are not exaggerating, Xander said ruefully. If anything, they are underselling it. I am currently 3 weeks behind on my orders. Eryn's eyebrows rose. 3 weeks, and you run this whole operation alone? I do. That is either very ambitious or very foolish. Probably both, Xander admitted. He studied her properly now that the immediate crisis had passed. Up close, Eryn was striking in a way he had not noticed during brief market encounters. Her green skin had a faint pearlescent quality in the sunlight, her amber eyes were bright with intelligence and humor, and her features, though unmistakably orcish, had a delicate quality that defied the usual stereotypes. She was taller than average for a woman, but not unusually so, perhaps 5.5 feet, and she moved with an easy confidence. You make cheese as well, do you not? I have seen you at market. Goat cheese, Eryn confirmed. Nothing as sophisticated as what you do. Just simple fresh cheese and a few aged varieties. I only have 20 goats, so it is a modest operation. Enough to keep me fed and sheltered, but not much beyond that. An awkward silence fell. Xander realized he was still blocking her path to the door, and he stepped aside, gesturing toward it. I should let you get back to your goats. I imagine they will need milking soon. They will, Eryn agreed, but she did not move immediately toward the door. Instead, she glanced at the cellar stairs, then back at him, her expression turning mischievous. You know, I was hiding in your cellar for nearly 15 minutes before you answered the door. I hope you do not mind. The door was unlocked and I was desperate. Xander blinked. 15 minutes? What were you doing down there all that time? Trying not to sneeze, Eryn said. It is very dusty. You should really clean it. I use it for storage, not entertaining unexpected guests, Xander said dryly. Fair point. Eryn moved toward the door, then paused with her hand on the latch. Truly, though, thank you. I know it was an odd situation, but I appreciate you not giving me away. Mistress Halloway means well, I suppose, but she does not understand that some of us are perfectly content on our own. Are you? Xander asked, surprising himself with the question. Content on your own, I mean. Eryn considered this, her head tilting slightly. I am, are you? Most days, Xander said honestly. Though I will admit it would be easier if I had help with the business, just not the kind of help Mistress Halloway has in mind. Eryn smiled, and it transformed her whole face, making her look younger and more playful. Well, if you ever change your mind about needing help, you know where to find me. I am quite good with cheese, even if mine is simpler than yours. She slipped out the door before Xander could respond, leaving him standing in the middle of his workroom, staring after her and feeling oddly unsettled. He shook his head and returned to his work, but found his thoughts drifting back to amber eyes and a mischievous smile more often than he cared to admit. 3 days later, a messenger arrived at Xander's cottage with a sealed letter. The boy, no more than 12, handed it over with a solemn expression and then held out his hand expectantly. Xander fished a copper coin from his pocket and sent the boy on his way, then broke the seal and unfolded the letter. It was written in Mistress Halloway's precise, no-nonsense hand. Dear Mr. Radcliffe and Miss Shaw, it has come to my attention that you were both present at Mr. Radcliffe's residence on the afternoon of the 15th, wherein Miss Shaw took refuge in said residence, and Mr. Radcliffe provided shelter and protection from outside interference. as this constitutes a successful introduction facilitated by my pursuit of both parties. I am hereby billing you each the sum of 2 silver crowns for matchmaking services rendered. Payment is due within 1 month. Receipts will be provided upon payment. I expect to hear news of your engagement in due course. Respectfully, Mistress Gertrude Halloway, licensed matchmaker. Xander read the letter 3 times, certain he must be misunderstanding something. Then he read it a 4th time and began to laugh. It started as a chuckle, then grew into full, helpless laughter that echoed through the cottage and startled the barn cat sleeping near the hearth. It was absurd. It was outrageous. It was also, he had to admit, a bit clever. Mistress Halloway had managed to construe his sheltering of Eryn as a matchmaking success, and was now demanding payment for it. The laughter faded as the practical implications set in. 2 silver crowns was not an insignificant sum, especially when he was already behind on his orders and worried about expenses. He could refuse to pay, of course, but Mistress Halloway had connections throughout the village and the surrounding region. She could make life difficult for him if she chose. He wondered if Eryn had received a similar letter. The answer came 2 hours later when Eryn herself appeared at his door, her own letter clutched in one hand, and her expression caught between outrage and reluctant amusement. "Did you receive one too?" she demanded without preamble. Xander held up his letter. "I did." "This is ridiculous," Eryn said, pushing past him into the cottage as if they were old friends rather than near strangers. "She cannot actually charge us for this. We were avoiding her, not seeking her services." "I agree it is ridiculous," Xander said, closing the door, "but I suspect she can charge us if she wants to. Matchmakers have legal standing in this region. If we refuse, she could take it to the magistrate." Eryn spun to face him, her eyes flashing. "On what grounds?" "We did not hire her. On the grounds that we benefited from her services, however unintentionally," Xander said. He moved to the work table and set his letter down beside a half-formed wheel of cheese. "She pursued us. We hid together. We met properly for the first time as a result. In a twisted sort of way, she did facilitate an introduction." "That is the most absurd logic I have ever heard," Eryn said, but her voice had lost some of its heat. She sank into the chair near the hearth, her shoulders slumping. "I do not have 2 silver crowns to spare. My herd is still recovering from the winter, and I lost 3 goats to wolves in the spring. If I pay her, I will not have enough saved to buy feed for next month." Xander felt a pang of sympathy. His own finances were tight, but he was not in immediate danger of going hungry. "I could pay yours as well as mine," he offered. "It was my cottage you hid in, after all. I feel some responsibility." Eryn's head snapped up, her expression fierce. "Absolutely not. I will not be in debt to you or anyone else." "It would not be a debt," Xander said mildly, "just a courtesy." "It would absolutely be a debt, and I will not accept it," Eryn said firmly. She stood and began pacing the length of the cottage, her braids swinging behind her. "There has to be a way out of this. What if we refuse to pay and dare her to take us to the magistrate? She would look foolish trying to explain the situation." "She might," Xander agreed, "but we would look worse. 2 unmarried people hiding together in a cottage. The gossip alone would be damaging, never mind the legal outcome." Eryn stopped pacing and turned to him, her expression thoughtful. "What if we called her bluff another way?" "What do you mean?" "She says she expects to hear news of our engagement," Eryn said, gesturing at the letter. "What if we told her we would only pay if her matchmaking actually led to something? If we are not courting by the time payment is due, she gets nothing. If we are, we pay." Xander stared at her. "You want to pretend to court?" "Not pretend," Eryn said. "Actually do it. Spend time together. See if there is any merit to her claim that we are a good match. If there is not, we refuse payment on the grounds that her services were unsuccessful. If there is—" She trailed off, shrugging. "Then I suppose she was right and we owe her the money." It was a mad idea, and Xander should have dismissed it immediately. But there was something appealing about the sheer audacity of it, the way it turned Mistress Halloway's own logic against her. And if he was honest with himself, he had thought about Eryn more than once over the past 3 days. There was something compelling about her, a spark of humor and intelligence that intrigued him. "You do realize," he said slowly, "that if we actually do this, we will be spending a fair amount of time together. Time you could be using to tend your goats and time I could be using to catch up on my orders." "True," Eryn said. "Unless we find a way to make it mutually beneficial." She glanced at the shelves of cheese, then back at him. "You said you are behind on your orders. What if I helped you?" "In exchange for what?" "You teach me your techniques," Eryn said, her eyes lighting up with sudden enthusiasm. "I have always wanted to make more sophisticated cheeses, but I do not have the knowledge or the equipment. If I help you catch up on your production, you teach me what you know. We spend time together. We both benefit practically, and at the end of the month we decide if Mistress Halloway's matchmaking was actually successful." Xander turned the idea over in his mind. It made a strange sort of sense. He desperately needed help with the business, and Eryn already had cheese-making experience. Teaching her would not be difficult, and having an extra pair of hands would be invaluable. And the prospect of spending time with her was, he had to admit, not unpleasant. "All right," he said. "We have an agreement, but we need rules." "Rules?" "If we are going to do this, we do it properly," Xander said. "No pretending. We are honest with each other about whether this is working or not, and if at any point one of us wants to stop, we stop. No hard feelings." Eryn nodded seriously. "Agreed. And one more rule. We tell Mistress Halloway exactly what we are doing. I want to see the look on her face when we explain that we will only pay her if she actually succeeds." Xander grinned. "Now that I would enjoy." They shook hands on it, and Xander noticed that Eryn's palm was calloused from work, her grip strong and sure. When she left an hour later, after they had planned out a schedule for her to come help with the cheese-making, Xander returned to his work with a strange lightness in his chest that had nothing to do with solving his production problems. The next morning, they went to see Mistress Halloway together. The matchmaker's office was a small room attached to her cottage on the edge of the village, furnished with a desk, several chairs, and shelves full of ledgers documenting decades of marriages, engagements, and courtships. She looked up sharply when Xander and Eryn entered together, her expression shifting from surprise to satisfaction in the span of a heartbeat. "Mr. Radcliffe, Miss Shaw, how lovely to see you both. I assume you are here to discuss payment terms for my services." "Actually," Eryn said, settling into a chair with the air of someone preparing for battle, "we are here to discuss the terms under which we would pay you." Mistress Halloway's eyes narrowed. "The terms are quite clear in my letter. 2 silver crowns each, payment due within 1 month. "Yes, but your letter also states that you expect news of our engagement," Xander said, taking the chair beside Eryn, "which implies that you believe your introduction will lead to a successful match." "I do." "Then you should have no objection to being paid only if it does," Eryn said sweetly. A long silence fell. Mistress Halloway set down her pen with deliberate care and folded her hands on the desk. "Explain." Xander leaned forward. "We have agreed to spend time together over the next month to see if there is potential for a genuine match between us. If at the end of that month we are courting in earnest, we will pay your fee without complaint. If we are not, you will admit that your matchmaking was unsuccessful and waive the fee." And if you simply lie and claim it did not work? Mistress Halloway asked sharply. We will sign a contract, Eryn said, stating that we will allow you to interview us separately at the end of the month and answer truthfully whether we have feelings for each other. If even one of us says yes, we pay. If we both say no, you waive the fee. Mistress Halloway studied them both with the intensity of a hawk examining field mice. Xander kept his expression neutral, though his heart was beating faster than usual. This whole plan hinged on the matchmaker's pride and confidence in her own abilities. Finally, Mistress Halloway smiled. It was a thin, triumphant smile that suggested she already knew how this would end. Very well. I accept your terms, but I will add one condition of my own. What condition? Xander asked warily. You will spend a minimum of 4 hours together at least 4 times per week, engaged in activities that allow for genuine conversation and connection. No simply working in silence side by side. I want actual courtship, not just proximity. Eryn glanced at Xander, who nodded slightly. Agreed, she said. Mistress Halloway pulled out a fresh sheet of parchment and began writing with swift, efficient strokes. Within minutes, she had drafted a contract outlining their agreement, including all the terms discussed. She signed it with a flourish, then pushed it across the desk. Xander and Eryn both read it carefully before adding their signatures. Excellent, Mistress Halloway said, looking thoroughly pleased with herself. I will see you both in 1 month. Do try to enjoy yourselves. I find that courtship works best when both parties are actually open to the possibility of falling in love. As they left the office, Eryn muttered under her breath, She is far too confident about this. She is, Xander agreed, which means we will need to be very careful not to prove her right. Eryn shot him a sidelong look, her expression unreadable. Would it be so terrible if she was right? The question caught Xander off guard, and he did not have a good answer. They walked back to his cottage in silence, and when they arrived, Eryn rolled up her sleeves and got to work without waiting for instruction. She had brought 2 large jugs of fresh goat milk with her, and Xander showed her how to heat it to the precise temperature needed for his aged cheddar recipe, explaining the science behind the process as they worked. Eryn was a quick study, asking intelligent questions and picking up the techniques with impressive speed. Her hands were steady and skilled, clearly accustomed to the delicate work of cheese making, and she had an instinctive feel for when the curds were ready to be cut. They worked in companionable silence for stretches, then burst into conversation about everything from the best hay for goats to the politics of the regional cheese market. By the time they had finished preparing 3 wheels of cheddar and set them to age, it was late afternoon, and Xander realized they had been working together for nearly 6 hours without a break. His back ached from bending over the work table, but he felt more energized than he had in weeks. That was good work, he said, wiping his hands on a towel. We got more done today than I usually manage in 2 days on my own. Eryn stretched, rolling her shoulders. Your techniques are more complex than mine, but they make sense once you understand the principles. I think I could replicate this on my own now with practice. You could, Xander agreed, though you would need better equipment. That copper pot alone cost me half a year's savings. I will work my way up to it, Eryn said. She glanced out the window at the lengthening shadows. I should get back to my goats, but I will return day after tomorrow if that suits you. It does. Eryn hesitated at the door, then turned back with a slight smile. This is a strange arrangement we have made. It is, Xander agreed, but I think it might work. I hope so, Eryn said softly. I would hate to give Mistress Halloway the satisfaction of being right. She left before Xander could respond, and he spent the rest of the evening wondering if she had meant what she said, or if there had been something else beneath the words. He was still wondering when he fell asleep that night, his dreams full of amber eyes and the smell of aging cheese. The next month unfolded in a pattern that quickly became familiar. Eryn arrived at Xander's cottage every other morning before dawn, bringing fresh goat milk and her own fierce energy. They worked side by side preparing cheese, and Xander taught her everything he knew. The difference between cultures, how to judge the texture of curds by feel, the art of aging and waxing, the delicate balance of salt and thyme that transformed milk into something extraordinary. In return, Eryn shared her own knowledge of goat husbandry, and Xander found himself fascinated by the careful breeding programs she had developed, the way she could read the health of an animal at a glance, her deep understanding of the hills and pastures where her herd grazed. She spoke about her goats the way Xander spoke about his cheese, with a passion and attention to detail that revealed genuine love for the work. They talked while they worked, long, rambling conversations that touched on everything and nothing. Eryn told him about growing up as the only orc child in a frontier village, the casual cruelties and small kindnesses that had shaped her, the loss of her parents to fever when she was 16, and the struggle to keep the farm and herd going alone. Xander told her about his own childhood in a larger town to the south, his apprenticeship with a master cheesemaker who had been brilliant but difficult, his decision to strike out on his own and build something that belonged entirely to him. They discovered shared opinions on the absurdity of regional politics, the beauty of the hills in spring, the best way to make bread. They discovered, too, points of disagreement. Eryn thought goats were superior to cows in every way, while Xander maintained that cattle produced better cheese. Eryn loved early mornings, while Xander preferred late nights. Eryn was reckless with money, spending what she had without thought for tomorrow, while Xander hoarded every copper coin against future disaster. But somehow, the disagreements never felt contentious. They debated with enthusiasm, each defending their position with vigor, but always with an undercurrent of humor that kept the arguments from becoming heated. Xander found himself looking forward to their debates as much as their agreements, enjoying the way Eryn's eyes flashed when she was worked up about something, the quick wit of her responses. 2 weeks into their arrangement, they had their first moment of real danger. They were in the middle of preparing a particularly delicate batch of soft cheese when Eryn suddenly swayed on her feet, her face going pale beneath the green. Xander caught her elbow as she stumbled. "What is wrong?" "Just dizzy," Eryn said, but her voice was faint. "I have not eaten since yesterday morning." Xander stared at her. "Yesterday morning? Why in the world not?" "I ran out of bread 3 days ago, and I have been too busy to bake more," Eryn said, trying to pull away. "I will be fine, I just need a moment." "You will sit down," Xander said firmly, guiding her to a chair, "and you will eat. Immediately." He rummaged through his pantry and emerged with bread, cheese, cold chicken from the night before, and a jar of pickled vegetables. He set it all in front of Eryn, who looked at the spread with something like longing. "I cannot take your food," she protested weakly. "You can and you will," Xander said. "Eat. Now." Eryn ate slowly at first, then with increasing speed as her hunger asserted itself. Xander watched her with a mixture of concern and growing anger, not at her but at the circumstances that had led to this, that she was working herself to exhaustion, skipping meals, struggling alone. "How long has this been going on?" he asked quietly. Eryn did not meet his eyes. "A few weeks. Maybe longer. The winter was hard and I lost some of my savings replacing goats. I have been making do." "Making do is not the same as starving yourself," Xander said. He pulled out a chair and sat across from her. "From now on, you eat here when you come to work. breakfast and lunch at minimum. I have plenty of food and you cannot help me if you are collapsing from hunger. I am not a charity case, Eryn said sharply. No, you are my business partner, Xander said, and it is in my interest to keep you fed and healthy. Besides, you have been bringing me goat milk 3 times a week without asking for payment. Consider the meal's fair exchange. Eryn looked like she wanted to argue further, but exhaustion and relief won out. She nodded slowly. All right, thank you. After that, meals became part of their routine. Xander made sure there was always food ready when Eryn arrived, and she slowly began to look less drawn, less exhausted. Color returned to her face, and her movements became more energetic. Watching her eat the meals he prepared gave Xander a satisfaction he had not anticipated, a sense of caring for someone that went beyond simple friendship. It was during one of these shared meals, 3 weeks into their month, that Xander realized he was in trouble. They were sitting at his small table, eating a simple stew Xander had made the night before, when Eryn laughed at something he said. It was not the first time she had laughed, but something about the sound in that moment, the way the afternoon light caught her face, the easy comfort between them, hit Xander with sudden, undeniable clarity. He was falling in love with her. The realization should have been alarming. Instead, it felt almost inevitable, as if he had been walking toward this moment since the day she tumbled into his cellar in a flurry of skirts and desperation. Everything about her drew him in. Her quick mind, her fierce independence, her unexpected gentleness with the goats and the cheese, the way she sang under her breath while she worked, her refusal to be pitied or patronized, her sharp humor and sharper insights. But loving her and acting on it were 2 different things. They had an agreement, clinical and clear. At the end of the month, they would be interviewed separately, and they would tell Mistress Halloway the truth. If even one of them admitted to feelings, they would pay the fee. Xander found himself in the absurd position of wanting to lose their wager. He did not know if Eryn felt the same. She was warm with him, affectionate even, but she was also careful. She never touched him unnecessarily, never let conversations drift into territory that might be construed as romantic. When they talked, it was about work, about ideas, about the world around them. Never about feelings, never about the future beyond their month-long agreement. Xander tried to tell himself it did not matter, that even if Eryn did not love him back, the month had been worthwhile. He had caught up on his orders, learned valuable lessons about delegation and partnership, made a genuine friend. That should be enough. It was not enough. The crisis came 4 days before their month was up. Eryn arrived at dawn as usual, but her expression was stormy, her movements sharp with barely contained fury. She slammed the milk jugs down on the work table with enough force to make Xander wince. "What happened?" he asked. "Tomlin happened," Eryn spat. "That miserable, small-minded, bigoted waste of space. Tomlin was a farmer who lived on the outskirts of the village, a man known for his vocal prejudice against orcs and his general unpleasantness." Xander felt his jaw tighten. "What did he do?" "He filed a complaint with the village council," Eryn said, pacing the length of the cottage like a caged animal. "Claiming that my goats have been grazing on his land and damaging his crops. It is a complete lie. My herd stays in the hills, nowhere near his miserable farm. But the council has to investigate, which means they will be inspecting my property, questioning my practices, and generally making my life difficult." "That is absurd," Xander said. "Everyone knows Tomlin is a liar. The council will see through it." "Will they?" Eryn turned to face him, her eyes blazing. "Or will they see an orc woman with no family and no standing, accused by a human farmer with connections and influence? This is not about truth, Xander. This is about him wanting me gone. He has been trying to buy my land for years, and I keep refusing. This is his way of forcing the issue. Xander felt anger rising in his chest, hot and fierce. There has to be something you can do. Legal recourse, someone you can appeal to. There is nothing, Eryn said bitterly. The best I can hope for is that the investigation clears me, but even that will take weeks, and in the meantime my reputation will be damaged. People will wonder if there is truth to his claims. Some will believe them simply because they want to. She sank into a chair, suddenly looking exhausted. I am so tired of fighting, of proving myself over and over again just to be allowed to exist here. Xander crossed to her and after a moment's hesitation rested his hand on her shoulder. She did not pull away. You are not fighting alone, he said quietly. I will testify on your behalf if needed. I will tell the council that I have seen your practices firsthand and know them to be responsible. And I will make it known that any damage to your reputation damages mine as well, since we have been working together. Eryn looked up at him, her expression softening. You would do that, even though it might hurt your business. My business means nothing if it requires me to stand by while a friend is attacked unjustly, Xander said. The word friend felt inadequate, but he did not know what else to call her. Not yet. Eryn reached up and covered his hand with hers, squeezing gently. Thank you. They stayed like that for a long moment, and Xander was acutely aware of the warmth of her hand, the way her amber eyes held his, the sudden shift in the air between them. Then Eryn pulled away, standing abruptly. We should get to work, she said, her voice rougher than usual. I need to keep my mind busy. They worked in near silence that day, the easy comfort between them replaced by a tension that Xander could not quite name. It felt like something was building, some wave gathering force, and he did not know whether to brace for impact or let it carry him. That evening, as Eryn was preparing to leave, Xander stopped her at the door. Eryn. She turned, her expression guarded. I meant what I said, Xander told her. About standing with you. Whatever happens with the council, you have my support, completely. Eryn's eyes searched his face, and Xander had the sense that she was looking for something, some answer to a question she had not asked. Finally, she nodded. I know, she said softly. And it means more than you realize. She left, and Xander stood in the doorway watching her go until she disappeared into the gathering dusk. The next morning, Xander went to the village council himself. The council met in a small building near the village square, a plain wooden structure that served multiple purposes throughout the week. Xander found 3 of the 5 council members present. Elder Pritchard, a retired soldier with a sharp mind and sharper tongue, Goodwife Ashton, a weaver who had lived in the village her entire life, and Merchant Carver, who owned the general store. They looked up in surprise when Xander entered. Mr. Radcliffe, Elder Pritchard said, setting down the papers he had been reviewing. This is unexpected. What brings you here? I understand there has been a complaint filed against Eryn Shaw, Xander said without preamble, regarding her goats allegedly damaging crops. The 3 council members exchanged glances. Word travels fast, Merchant Carver said dryly. Is the complaint legitimate? Xander asked. That is what we are attempting to determine, Goodwife Ashton said carefully. Farmer Tomlin has provided testimony, and we will be visiting Miss Shaw's property to investigate. Then you should also speak with me, Xander said. I have been working closely with Miss Shaw for the past 3 weeks. I have seen her herd and her land management practices firsthand. Her goats graze exclusively in the hills east of her property, nowhere near Tomlin's farm. The complaint is false. Elder Pritchard leaned back in his chair, studying Xander with interest. You are willing to testify to this under oath? I am. and you are aware that contradicting Farmer Tomlin's testimony could create difficulties for you. He has friends in the village." "I am aware," Xander said, "and I do not care. The truth is the truth, regardless of who finds it inconvenient." Merchant Carver smiled slightly. "Well spoken." "Very well, Mr. Radcliffe. We will add your testimony to our investigation. Is there anything else?" Xander hesitated, then decided to be bold. "Yes. I want to know why Tomlin filed this complaint now. Miss Shaw has been running her operation for years without issue. The timing seems suspicious." "We have noted the timing," Elder Pritchard said, his tone neutral but his eyes knowing. "And we are not blind to Farmer Tomlin's history of disputes with his neighbors. Rest assured, this investigation will be thorough and fair." It was as much as Xander could hope for. He thanked the council and left, feeling slightly better but still uneasy. The village was small enough that news traveled quickly, and he knew his public support of Eryn would be noted and discussed. Sure enough, when he returned to his cottage, he found Mistress Halloway waiting for him, seated primly on his doorstep. "Mr. Radcliffe," she said, rising as he approached, "I hear you have involved yourself in Miss Shaw's difficulties with the council." "I have," Xander said warily. "Is that a problem?" "Not at all," Mistress Halloway said, and to Xander's surprise, she looked pleased. "In fact, it is precisely the sort of behavior I would expect from a man courting a woman in earnest. Standing by her during difficult times, offering public support despite potential consequences. Very admirable." Xander felt heat rise to his face. We are not, oh, spare me," Mistress Halloway said, waving a hand dismissively. "I have eyes, Mr. Radcliffe. I have seen the way you look at each other at market. I have heard from my sources that you have been spending nearly every day together, sharing meals, working side by side. You are courting, whether you wish to call it that or not. Our agreement was to determine if your matchmaking was successful," Xander said stiffly. "Nothing more." "And have you determined that?" Xander opened his mouth, then closed it. He had not expected such a direct question. Mistress Halloway's expression softened slightly. "Mr. Radcliffe, I did not become the most successful matchmaker in this region by forcing incompatible people together. I saw something between you and Miss Shaw that day at your cottage, a spark of possibility. All I did was give you both a reason to explore it. What happens next is entirely up to you." She left him standing in his yard, her words echoing in his mind. 2 days before their month was up, the village council issued its findings. After a thorough investigation, including interviews with multiple witnesses and a personal inspection of Eryn's property, they concluded that Farmer Tomlin's complaint was without merit. Eryn's goats had not trespassed on his land, and there was no evidence of any damage to his crops. Furthermore, the council issued a formal reprimand to Tomlin for filing a false complaint, and warned him against any future harassment of his neighbors. Xander heard the news from Merchant Carver, who stopped by the cottage that afternoon with a knowing smile. "Your testimony was very helpful," Carver said, "as was the testimony of several other witnesses who came forward once they heard you had spoken up. It seems Miss Shaw has more support in this village than Tomlin realized." Xander felt relief wash through him. "Thank you for letting me know." "Of course, and Mr. Radcliffe, a word of advice. When you find someone worth fighting for, you do not let them go. Life on the frontier is hard enough without facing it alone." The merchant left, and Xander sat down at his work table, his mind racing. Tomorrow was the last day of their month. Tomorrow, he and Eryn would be interviewed separately by Mistress Halloway, and they would have to answer truthfully whether they had developed feelings for each other. Xander knew what his answer would be, but he still did not know what Eryn would say. She arrived the next morning with the dawn, as had become her habit, but there was no milk with her this time. Instead, she carried a small basket covered with a cloth. "I brought breakfast," she said, setting the basket on the table. "Fresh bread, honey, berries from the hills. I thought we should talk before we see Mistress Halloway." Xander's heart began to beat faster. "All right." They sat at the table, the food between them, and for a long moment neither spoke. Finally, Eryn broke the silence. "These past weeks have been the best I have had in a long time," she said quietly. "Working with you, learning from you, feeling like part of something larger than just survival. You have been kind to me in ways I did not expect and did not know I needed." "Eryn," she held up a hand. "Let me finish. When we made this agreement, I thought it was clever. A way to outsmart Mistress Halloway, to avoid paying a fee I could not afford. I never expected to actually enjoy it. To look forward to seeing you every day, to miss you on the days we did not work together. To feel like I had found someone who saw me as more than just an orc trying to make a living on the frontier." Xander reached across the table and took her hand. "I see you, Eryn, all of you, and what I see is extraordinary." Eryn's eyes glistened, but she blinked the tears back. "I am afraid," she admitted, "of what happens if I tell Mistress Halloway the truth, of what it means to let someone in to risk being hurt. But I am more afraid of what happens if I do not tell her the truth, if I walk away from you, because I was too scared to take the chance." "Then do not walk away," Xander said. His voice was steady, but his heart felt like it might burst from his chest. "Stay, court me properly, not because of a wager or an agreement, but because you want to. Let me court you. Let me prove that what I feel is real and lasting." "What do you feel?" Eryn asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I love you," Xander said simply. "I think I started falling for you the moment you tumbled into my cellar looking like a startled fox, and I have been falling ever since. Every day I spend with you, I find something new to admire, some new reason to want you in my life permanently. You challenge me, you inspire me, you make me laugh even when I am exhausted and overwhelmed. I love working with you, talking with you, being with you. And if you will have me, I want to build a life with you, not just a business partnership, but everything." A tear slipped down Eryn's cheek, and she laughed shakily. "You realize Mistress Halloway is going to be insufferable about this." "I do not care," Xander said. "Let her be smug." She was right. She was, Eryn agreed. She stood, pulling Xander up with her, and before he could process what was happening, she was kissing him. It was soft and tentative at first, then deeper, more certain, and Xander wrapped his arms around her and held on like she was the only solid thing in a spinning world. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Eryn rested her forehead against his. "I love you too," she said. "In case that was not clear." Xander laughed, giddy with relief and joy. "It was fairly clear, but I appreciate the confirmation." They went to see Mistress Halloway together that afternoon, hand in hand. The matchmaker took one look at them and smiled her thin, triumphant smile. "I assume you are here to pay your fee." "We are," Xander said. He pulled out his coin purse and counted out 4 silver crowns, setting them on the desk. "With interest for making us wait an entire month before admitting you were right." Mistress Halloway laughed, a surprisingly warm sound. "I will accept the interest graciously. And may I offer my congratulations. I expect to hear news of an engagement within the season." "You will," Eryn said, and though her cheeks flushed green beneath her skin, her voice was confident. They left the matchmaker's office and walked back through the village, drawing curious stares and more than a few smiles. Word of their courtship would spread quickly, Xander knew, and there would be talk. But he found he did not care. Let them talk. He had Eryn beside him, her hand warm in his, and that was worth any amount of gossip. Over the following weeks, their courtship settled into a comfortable rhythm. Eryn continued to come to the cottage most days, but now she worked as a full partner rather than an apprentice. They combined their operations formally, pooling resources and knowledge. Eryn's goat milk provided the base for a new line of specialty cheeses that quickly became popular at market, while Xander's techniques and equipment allowed her to expand her own production beyond what she had thought possible. The business thrived in ways Xander had never managed alone. With two of them sharing the work, they could take on more orders without sacrificing quality, could experiment with new varieties, could actually rest on occasion without falling behind. The cottage that had felt cramped and overwhelming now felt full in the best way, alive with activity and purpose. And beyond the work, there was the simple joy of being together. Meals shared, conversations that stretched late into the night, small moments of affection that made Xander's heart swell. Eryn had a habit of humming while she worked, old songs from her childhood, and Xander found himself learning the melodies, humming along. She would lean against him while they waited for cheese to set, her head on his shoulder, and they would talk about nothing in particular, just enjoying the contact. 3 months after their month-long wager ended, Xander asked Eryn to marry him. He did it without ceremony or grand gestures, simply asking her one evening as they sat outside watching the sunset paint the hills gold and crimson. Eryn said yes before he had even finished the question, kissing him soundly and then laughing through happy tears. They were married in a small ceremony at the village square, with Elder Pritchard officiating and most of the village in attendance. Mistress Halloway sat in the front row, looking more smug than anyone had a right to look, and Xander caught her eye at one point and mouthed "thank you." She inclined her head regally, accepting the gratitude as her due. The wedding feast was modest but joyful, and when Merchant Carver stood to give a toast, he raised his cup and said, "To the matchmaker's finest work, and to 2 stubborn people who finally admitted what everyone else already knew." The crowd laughed and cheered, and Xander looked at Eryn, his wife, and thought that he had never been happier to lose a wager. They merged their properties over the next year, building an addition to Xander's cottage to accommodate Eryn's cheese-making equipment, and creating a proper dairy barn for her expanded goat herd. The business continued to grow, earning them a reputation for quality that reached beyond the immediate region. Orders came from as far as the capital city, and they hired 2 apprentices to help manage the increased production. Farmer Tomlin sold his land and moved away 18 months after the council's ruling, and Xander and Eryn bought his property at a fair price, expanding their grazing land and ensuring that no one else with similar prejudices would settle so close. They planted apple trees on part of the land, planning for a future where they could age cheese in a proper cave and maybe, someday, make cider. Life settled into a pattern that was both challenging and deeply satisfying. The work was hard, the hours long, but they faced it together, and that made all the difference. They argued occasionally, usually about the best way to manage some aspect of the business, but the arguments never lasted long and were always resolved with honesty and compromise. 2 years after their marriage, Eryn told Xander she was pregnant. They were in the dairy when she said it, Xander's hands covered in cheese curd, Eryn leaning against the work table with a strange expression on her face. For a moment, Xander simply stared at her, not quite processing the words. Then the meaning sank in, and he let out a whoop of joy, lifting her up and spinning her around despite her laughing protests that he was getting cheese everywhere. Their daughter was born in the spring, a small, perfect creature with green skin, tiny tusks that would grow more prominent as she aged, and her father's dark hair. They named her Dahlia, after the flowers that grew wild in the hills, and she became the center of their world in ways Xander had not anticipated. Eryn took to motherhood with the same fierce dedication she brought to everything else, and Xander found himself constantly amazed by her strength and grace. She nursed Dahlia while reviewing orders, sang lullabies in the old orc tongue while preparing cheese, carried the baby on her back while tending the goats. And when Xander held his daughter, feeling her tiny hand grip his finger, he was overwhelmed by a love so intense it almost frightened him. The business adapted to accommodate their new reality. They hired additional help, trusted their apprentices with more responsibility, and established routines that allowed them to balance work and family. It was not always easy, but they made it work through patience, communication, and an unwavering commitment to supporting each other. Dahlia grew into a bright, curious child who loved the goats and showed an early aptitude for cheese making. She would toddle around the dairy, her small hands reaching for everything, and Eryn would patiently teach her the names of tools and ingredients, letting her feel different textures, explaining processes in simple terms. When Dahlia was 3, Eryn became pregnant again, and their second daughter, Thea, was born the following winter. She was quieter than Dahlia, more contemplative with her mother's amber eyes and a tendency to watch everything with intense focus before acting. The cottage and dairy continued to expand, and their reputation grew. They became known not just for quality cheese, but for being a family business that embodied the best of the frontier spirit, hardworking, innovative, and deeply committed to the community. They hired workers from diverse backgrounds, including several young orcs who struggled to find employment elsewhere, and created an environment where skill and dedication mattered more than species or origin. 5 years after their marriage, the village held its annual fair, the largest market event of the year. Vendors came from across the region to sell their wares, and the square filled with stalls displaying everything from fresh produce to fine fabrics to handcrafted furniture. Xander and Eryn set up their booth early in the morning, laying out samples of their various cheeses, from the simple fresh goat cheese that had started Eryn's business to the complex aged varieties that had made their reputation. Dahlia and Thea helped in their own small ways, Dahlia arranging the display with careful attention to aesthetics, Thea sitting behind the booth watching people with her serious gaze. The fair was busy, customers streaming past in a constant flow, and Xander and Eryn worked side by side serving them, answering questions, making sales. They had developed an easy rhythm over the years, able to anticipate each other's movements and needs, and they moved around each other with practiced grace. In the late afternoon, when the crowd had thinned slightly, Xander noticed a familiar figure approaching their booth. Mistress Halloway, now grayer than she had been but still straight-backed and sharp-eyed, walked up with her ever-present ledger under one arm. "Mistress Halloway," Xander said warmly, "it is good to see you. Would you like to try our new herb-aged goat cheese? We just perfected the recipe." "I would be delighted," Mistress Halloway said, accepting the sample Eryn offered. She tasted it with the air of a connoisseur, then nodded approvingly. "Excellent. You have both come very far since that day you stumbled into that ridiculous wager." "Not so ridiculous," Eryn said, smiling. "It worked, did it not?" "It did," Mistress Halloway agreed. "Though I will confess it was one of my more unconventional approaches. I was not entirely certain you would actually go through with it." "We are glad we did," Xander said. He glanced at Eryn, who was helping Dahlia wrap a cheese purchase, and felt the familiar swell of gratitude and love that still caught him by surprise sometimes. "Thank you, truly, for being stubborn and relentless, and refusing to let us hide from the possibility of happiness. Mistress Halloway's expression softened. That is my calling, Mr. Radcliffe, to see the potential in people that they cannot yet see in themselves, and to give them the push they need to discover it. You and Miss Shaw, now Mrs. Radcliffe, were one of my finest successes, and I am very proud of what you have built together. She purchased several wheels of cheese, paid handsomely, and then moved on to the next booth, leaving Xander and Eryn to exchange a look of shared amusement and affection. She is still terrifying, Eryn said. She is, Xander agreed, but she was also right about us. She was. The fair continued into the evening, lanterns being lit as dusk fell, music starting up from a group of musicians near the center of the square. Xander and Eryn packed up their remaining stock, their booth having done remarkably well, and let Dahlia and Thea run off to watch the musicians, under the watchful eye of one of their apprentices. They stood together in the gathering dark, Xander's arm around Eryn's waist, watching their daughters dance to the music, and Xander thought about all the unlikely turns that had brought them to this moment. A cellar door flung open in desperation, a ridiculous bill, a wager born of stubbornness and humor, and beneath it all, the slow, steady growth of love. You ever think about that day? Eryn asked quietly. When I hid in your cellar? Sometimes, Xander said. Usually when I am down there getting supplies and remember how dusty it was. You were right about that, by the way. It was very dusty. Eryn laughed and elbowed him gently. I meant, do you ever think about how absurd it all was? How we could have just as easily never spoken again after Mistress Halloway sent those letters. How close we came to missing all of this. I think about it, Xander admitted. And I am grateful every day that we were both foolish enough to take the wager seriously. That we gave ourselves the chance to discover what we could be together. Eryn leaned her head on his shoulder. I am grateful, too, for all of it, for you. They stood in comfortable silence, watching their daughters, watching the village celebrate, and feeling the deep contentment that comes from building something meaningful with someone you love. The cheesemaker and the goat herder, brought together by a matchmaker's audacity and their own willingness to take a chance on possibility. The music swelled. Dahlia grabbed Thea's hands and spun her in a circle, and Xander kissed the top of Eryn's head, thinking that life on the frontier was hard and uncertain, but it was also full of unexpected grace. You just had to be brave enough to hide in a cellar when opportunity knocked, and foolish enough to believe that love could grow from the most unlikely seeds. Years continued to pass, each bringing its own challenges and triumphs. The dairy expanded further, and they eventually built the proper aging cave they had dreamed of, carved into the hillside behind their property. They hired more workers, trained more apprentices, and became pillars of the community, known for their fairness, their quality, and their willingness to help others. Dahlia and Thea grew into capable young women who took active roles in the business, each bringing their own strengths. Dahlia had her mother's adventurous spirit and her father's precision, while Thea possessed a quiet brilliance that led her to innovate new cheese-making techniques that pushed the business in exciting directions. Xander and Eryn grew older together, their hair graying, their hands rougher from years of work, but their love deepening with every passing season. They still worked side by side most days, still debated the merits of goats versus cows, still shared meals and conversations that stretched into the night. On their 10th wedding anniversary, they returned to the village square where they had been married. The square was quiet that evening, most people home for dinner, and they walked hand in hand to the spot where they had exchanged vows. 10 years, Eryn said softly. It feels like both an eternity and no time at all. I know what you mean, Xander said. He pulled her close, and they swayed gently to music only they could hear. I would not change a single moment of it. Well, except maybe that time you convinced me to try making cheese from sheep's milk, and it turned into an inedible disaster. Eryn laughed. That was a learning experience. We learned that sheep's milk requires very different handling. We learned that you are sometimes too ambitious for your own good, Xander corrected, but his tone was affectionate. They danced in the empty square. Two people who had found each other in the most unlikely way and had built a life together through hard work, dedication, and abiding love. The matchmaker's bill had long since been paid, but the debt of gratitude they owed to that first, absurd introduction remained. As the stars came out above them, Xander thought about the young man he had been, overwhelmed and alone, hiding from a persistent matchmaker, and the frightened orc girl who had tumbled into his cellar seeking refuge. They had both been running from something, but in finding each other, they had discovered what they had been running toward all along. "I love you," he said, simple and true. "I love you too," Eryn replied, her amber eyes bright in the starlight. They walked home together through the quiet streets, past the dairy that bore both their names, past the fields where goats grazed peacefully, past the cottage that had started as his alone and had become theirs. Their daughters were waiting for them, dinner on the table, and the house was full of warmth and light and laughter. It was not a perfect life. There were still challenges, still struggles, still moments of doubt and difficulty. But it was a good life, built on a foundation of partnership and trust and love that had begun with a ridiculous wager, and a matchmaker's unwavering belief in her own abilities. And every year, on the anniversary of the day Eryn had hidden in his cellar, Xander and Eryn sent Mistress Halloway a wheel of their finest cheese, along with a note that said simply, "Thank you for billing us anyway." The matchmaker always wrote back, her responses varying from year to year but always ending with the same line. "It was my pleasure. Some matches are made in heaven, but the best ones are made in cellars." And in their home filled with love and laughter, surrounded by the fruits of their shared labor and their shared life, Xander and Eryn could only agree,